there's been a murder of podcast. A bloody mess.
Hello and welcome to A Bloody Mess. We are a badly researched true crime podcast. My name is Jim, and with me as always is the other host, Chen.
Hello.
Today is actually part 2 of our podcast series and also part 2 of our series on H Holmes. Tonight we have a special guest, a co-host if you will, in the form of a little black and white dog called Noodles. She's normally quite well behaved and quiet, and she's Chen's dog. But we've done our best to hide all the squeaky toys, but she's very good at finding them. She's currently in the kitchen chasing moths. So if you do hear any scuttling, we've not got rats or anything like that. There's no hauntings here yet.
What do you mean we? This is my house.
Yeah, I've invited myself in.
Also, just a warning, we had like these 13-year-olds, it's 10:30 at night, but we had these 13-year-olds outside having a party who were quite noisy. So if you hear some screaming, that's not us murdering anyone in a basement, that's just these kids in the garden in the back.
I've been outside and frightened them away, as is the norm.
We used one of those H Holmes bird scaring machines.
Yes.
Get off my property!
And it worked quite well. Just for those of you who are dropping in now, we would recommend to go and listen to the first podcast episode.
Otherwise, that wouldn't make any fucking sense at all.
It's a bit random. Also, please also check out the interview that we did with Fair City Podcast Network, which was fantastic and should hopefully give you an idea where we're coming from with this.
Yeah, if you found this podcast, it's probably on the Fair City Network, so go back and listen to it. It's good. It's probably better than these 2 episodes.
Yeah, I think we're bowing to other people's superior knowledge of being professional broadcasters, but that's not what this is about. We're trying to invite you into our home, or Chen's home, merely to have a conversation. A few beers, a conversation, and a chat. That's kind of what we're aiming for, really.
Yes, telling a story. A bad story.
Yeah.
And you said beers. We're actually drinking blueberry cider tonight, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
We thought we'd be continental.
Yes, they're delicious. It tastes like Ribena.
Yes.
Excellent. So recap where we've been then. We talked about the World Fair and what a shithole Chicago had turned into. We talked about H Holmes' childhood, getting locked in a GP's office with Skellington, and I would be scared shitless, but James seemed to enjoy that.
I would like that.
Yep, you freak.
I've always been a fan of being exposed to a bone.
We've talked about H Holmes and his scams. We've talked about building the house, how he hasn't really paid for anything yet, building the hotel, killing people. To name a few, we've talked about Julia, sadly, and the child Pearl. We've talked about another wife he's had called Marta, who James really seemed to like, but unfortunately she won't be making another return.
Not at all?
No, sorry.
That's...
H Holmes didn't kill her, so that's good.
I suppose she's one person that escaped him.
Yeah.
We left off last episode with the culmination of basically a double murder, triple murder if you count the backstreet, backroom abortion that he carried out.
Yeah.
Really now he's entering the stride in this next episode. There's going to be some gruesome bits, some not for the squeamish. But,
we're not going to go into too much details, but it's sad. More children will die. There'll be more insurance scams. But at the end, it's a happy-ish ending, you know.
But tell me more about these cures for baldness that he was sending away for.
Well, we'll get onto the cures of baldness. We will get onto that. But we did end by him selling skeletons to schools. And last episode we did mention a man named Benjamin Peitzel, who Holmes did send to a institute for alcoholics. And Holmes paid for this all, and the institute believed that there was a cure for alcoholism. That's not the important part. I mean, Holmes did send Peitzel to get the recipe or any tips so Holmes could recreate the recipe and sell it.
See, this was the thing. By believing there was a cure for alcoholism, it was about, they thought it was a cure that you could take.
Yeah, they injected gold into the bloodstream. Yeah. So Holmes ended up founding the Silver Ash Institute, which would be in the bottom floor of his hotel. But the most important bit to take from Peitzel's trip is 2 things. Peitzel used an alias named Phelps. So remember Phelps.
I'm remembering it now.
What is it?
Phelps.
Michael Phelps. No, it's not. It's just normal Phelps. And but when he returned, he spoke to Holmes of the most beautiful woman he had ever seen working as a secretary at the Institute. Now, James talks to me about beautiful women. I have no inclination to go and write to them, but that's what Holmes did. Holmes wrote to her directly, offering her a job as a secretary for double her current salary. He just, old time, slipped into her DMs.
That telegraph went straight in there.
Direct envelope mail. That's what he did. She weirdly accepted and promptly moved to Chicago. Her name was Emmeline Sigrand, and she soon became attracted to Holmes and his thatched moustache. And by all accounts, they had a relationship out with the normal employer and employee relationship. Holmes eventually asked her to marry him, and she accepted, but however, before they had time to plan the wedding, it would appear that Emmeline had become aware of what type of person Holmes was, all his lies, his tricks and stuff like that, not the killing part, and by witness accounts and from the residents in the building, they suggested that she was planning on leaving Holmes. So it was no surprise that Emmeline suddenly left and was never seen again, with Holmes claiming she had left to be with another man and got married to this man, and he even presented them with evidence, which would be a typed note saying Emmeline Sigrand married Robert E. Phelps. Dun dun dun! Do you see what I did there?
Yeah, that's so basically it shows that whilst he is incredibly imaginative, he's kind of limited on his choice of names.
Yes, but yeah. So did he have this all pre-planned? I don't know. He's a very clever man.
I mean, it may well be that there was someone that she was friends with and keen on that was called Phelps.
Yeah, maybe.
And that's where he got the first idea for the name. He was trying to perhaps frame him almost.
Maybe you're right. You know, it was never really proved that he did kill her. However, a couple things stand out. Residents reported seeing a trunk leaving Holmes' office the day after she was last seen, and Holmes and Peitzel were locked in the office all day. A few weeks after, Chappell, who we spoke about before, his kind of right-hand skinning man, received a trunk containing an unknown woman, possibly Emmeline, which he went on to skin, clean, and another college got a skeleton for education. It was surmised later by police, when they eventually caught up with him and they investigated the murder hotel, they found in the room-size safe Holmes had installed years before that there were women's footprints engraved on the door. Now, the only way that a human, any strength, would manage to leave footprints on an iron door would be if Holmes had been lacing the floor with acid in order to speed up the gas reaction, meaning the woman must have been barefoot, pushing the door with her feet, with her last gasp trying to escape.
This really does hammer home how horrific it is, because not only was she being gassed with the chemical reaction, obviously producing horrible acrid fumes to breathe in, the acid was also caustic and corroding her skin, basically, and the metal that was in there as well. So it's
if it's going to stain metal, you imagine what it's going to do to her feet. Yeah,
I mean, this wasn't I'm being gassed, I'm going to quietly go to sleep and then not wake up. This was
there was panic. There was
panicked poisoning.
Yeah, and for Holmes, he liked the sense of this person panicking, realizing what was happening, and just realizing they're going to die, and that's what he seemed to like and get off on. These footprints eluded police and even Holmes for years before they were discovered, and these possibly could have been Emmeline's footprints. So moving on a bit after that sad story, 1983, just before the fair started, Holmes now had numerous businesses on the go. A mail-order cure for baldness, the Silver Ass Institute, and of course all the rent from the building, the residents in the building. But along with this, he was still in debt to many furniture stores, and the iron company, the furnace builders and stuff like that. And he was also being barraged with letters from families looking for missing women, private investigators and looking for these missing women as well. And at this point, Holmes knew he wouldn't be in Chicago for much longer. It's important to note that these people were not accusing Holmes of anything. They were just asking questions because they knew the women were at this hotel.
And where was this hotel?
Oh, this hotel was in Chicago.
I have a few facts about Chicago. The city actually reversed the flow of the River Chicago to aid with the sanitation and clean water supply. Ordinarily, the river should flow into Lake Michigan, but it was reversed to flow into the Mississippi. This is the fucking insanity that we're dealing with at the time. They were turning rivers around just because they could.
Yeah?
And this is absolute madness.
I didn't know that was even a possible thing.
No, I don't think it's so much, because I thought rivers all went into the sea, so I thought they were forcing it back up into the mountains. But no, that's...
Would you just call it redirecting a river?
No, they literally reversed the flow.
Yeah?
100% reversed it.
Maybe we should do that with the Nile. That'll be a challenge, wouldn't it? However, with all these people looking for missing women, Holmes had a larger problem. Well, in his eyes, this was a larger problem. He had a lack of secretary, which leads us on to Minnie R. Williams. Holmes knew Minnie from a previous business trip to Boston, and the pair had kept in touch. And Holmes had even travelled back and forth while still married to Martha. Sorry, I forgot she makes a comeback. That's it, though. He would travel back and forth to court Minnie, but eventually he just stopped. He must have got bored. And when he stopped, she moved to Chicago. She found a job in Chicago, moved there, and she wrote to Holmes of her arrival. But however, Minnie knew Holmes under a different name, which was Henry Gordon, but she called him Harry. But she was now, while she was in Chicago, she was under strict instructions to call him Henry Howard Holmes, as he had changed it to that for business reasons. Eventually, Holmes doing what Holmes does, Holmes proposed to Minnie, and again she accepted. Minnie, however, was by all accounts, she was not as attractive as the previous women in his life, so why had he chosen her? The reason was probably because he had found out that Minnie was left an estate by an uncle in Texas worth in nowadays money $3 million.
I thought he made the decision because she was absolute dynamite in the sack.
Maybe. Well, that could be it. I don't know. The book didn't go into that kind of detail. No.
That's a hunch that I have.
Yeah, so he probably had his eyes on this estate, and he probably maybe had plans for another hotel in this estate. We don't know. But he proved it that he was just after this estate, as he convinced Minnie to sign over possession of the estate to a man named Alexander Bond, who in turn signed it over to a man named Benton T. Lyman. Little did Minnie know that Alexander was Holmes and that Benton was in fact Benjamin Peitzel. He had tricked Minnie into giving him the estate, and even worse than that, he insisted on a small wedding, just the two of them and the preacher. And even though the ceremony went ahead like this, there was no official record of them ever being married. So he's faked a goddamn wedding now.
It makes you wonder if it was actually a real clergyman that did the wedding. Perhaps that was someone he just paid.
Maybe it was. Maybe they did get married, and this guy's just not managed to find the records. I've not looked for the records.
I've had a bit of a look.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find anything.
Using the marriage record 400.
Yeah, I looked in your kitchen. I looked under the settee, and I
Did you look behind the fridge?
I could look now.
Oh, no, we don't have time, do we? Once the World Fair had started, Holmes began receiving guests for his new hotel. If any men turned up, he would tell them his hotel was fully booked, and soon his hotel would be full of women travelling alone, which made Minnie very jealous because he was such a charming man. He ended up buying Minnie a new house far away from the hotel, proving that he had money. But all this says to me is he now saw Minnie as an estate waiting to be moved into rather than his wife.
It does sound like a good plan, that door, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Every time a man turns up, you're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, we've no room," and then it's like when you're queuing up to get into a nightclub and the bouncers don't let you in,
no more
and
in.
they're like, "You two from the back, you two girls, come here, you can go in."
I was in a strippers once and convinced the bouncers I was gay, so he managed to get. I got into the private bit. Yeah. He was like, "No, you can't get this naked women." I was like, "Sorry, I'm gay." Yeah, true story.
Did they do any checks to see if the women were having any effects on you, or
no? To be fair, I just went in to grab some people and
I beg your pardon.
So
you're not allowed to do that.
We were close to missing our train, so I had to get in. So I said anything I could to get in, get these people, and we missed the train. I had to phone the guy's wife to be and did the bit of the hangover. It's like, Vicky, we fucked up, and I paid £180 for a taxi home from Edinburgh.
Jesus.
Then I went to work at 6 a.m. Yeah. And now here we are, 8 hours later, doing a podcast. Where were we? Within weeks, however, 4 people who had either been living or working in the building had gone missing. There were reports of women suddenly leaving and not paying their bills. There was clothes left in rooms, but Holmes was just, he was forgiving all of this. And there were reports of the chemicals smells from the basement being smelled in the corridors, but no one bat an eyelid because he was a doctor.
I think also a point with that was that when someone noticed it, so someone said, "Oh, this, there's a lot of people just go missing." Everyone there was like, "Oh, it's always been like that."
Yeah,
because that was all they'd known.
Yeah,
and it was literally like each crime that he committed, kind of backed up the official story of, oh, it just keeps happening. They just keep going.
Yeah.
Because there was another person left, and everyone just went, oh, I guess the people do just leave all of a
Because
sudden.
people at this time had never seen anything like this. They wouldn't have thought it would happen.
And people, like I said, people in the last episode, we mentioned that people were flocking from the smaller towns and villages and the outskirts of the area. People coming from different states to the freshly rebuilt city. So people were a little wet behind the ears, a little naive, and they were. And
it probably was a time where people were just getting up and leaving because they could. There was no Facebook check-in, so no one really knew where people were.
No.
Yeah. How did people live without Facebook check-ins?
Did they have Find My Friends on the iPhones?
Yes. Why did they not use that?
That would have been easier.
Yeah. With this hotel, then, Holmes had at his disposal an almost endless supply of people he could kill in different ways. However, he would never really kill face to face, or if he did, it was while they slept with no risk of a fight back. The safe was used to muffle the screams and pounding of people trying to escape. Oh, interesting fact, he actually had the safe sound tested by Ned. We spoke about Ned in the first episode.
Jewelry shop owner.
The jewelry shop owner who H Holmes stole his wife and killed his wife and daughter, stuff like that. Yeah. Spoilers if you're going to listen to this episode 2 than episode 1, but
I have to say, if you listen to episode 2 than episode 1, you're a fucking numpty. And you should just follow things in the order.
Yeah.
If we're putting the effort in to make this podcast, I think you should put the effort into listening to it in the correct order.
Yeah, or just fuck off. Yeah, or in the...
Please don't fuck off. We will actually like you to listen, but this kind of just underlines how we're quite joking.
Yeah, sorry, James. I won't tell our listeners to fuck off again.
Thank you.
Yes, the safe was used to muffle the screams, or he would use the rooms. Some of the rooms were airtight, so he would simply turn on the gas while they slept, or he would just sneak in to chloroform them. However, all the bodies would end up sliding down the grease chute to either be burned in his furnace, disposed of in quicklime, or they would just be sent the way of chapel to be passed on to teaching institutes. What he seemed to like is the power he had over these people's lives, and in their moments of panic, he seemed to really like hearing people panic, being terrified, and slowly realising they're going to die, especially the people in the safe. However, these were only short-term highs for Holmes, and once it passed, he needed his next fixed, and soon.
I think a lot of it is also, not only is he getting his thrills from murdering the people, but he's also getting his thrills from not murdering them. He's allowing them to live another day, so he's got the power. Literally everyone who's in a room in his building, he has control over whether they live or die. And you've got to imagine having that much power all the time. You are going to feel like a god.
Yeah. And you're probably right, because there is a quote, I don't have the direct quote here, but in his memoirs and this was in his confession, that he confessed from the moment he met Peitzel, who became basically his best friend, he intended to kill Peitzel and his family. So maybe you're right, and he loved letting him live, thinking they were friends. Yeah,
it was just, again, just power tripping, just more egomania bullshit, madness.
Yeah. And we'll move back on to Minnie for a while. Minnie had a sister called Anna, and Minnie told Anna that she was signing over this estate. And Anna didn't like Holmes anyway, and her suspicions only grew after this. She was not convinced that he was the man Minnie thought he was. To combat this, Holmes invited Anna for an all-expenses-paid trip to Chicago.
To where?
Chicago.
That's funny, I have a fact about Chicago.
Oh, really?
Did you know that, relating to my last fact, the River Chicago is dyed green annually every year to celebrate St. Patrick's Day in a rather contrived act of celebration.
Does it do anything to the fish? Have you seen Rampage?
I don't care.
Rampage is a big giant crocodile thing going about in the city. Maybe it's because they dye the river green. I don't think so, because the film actually explains why, but
does it?
I had you go in there for a minute.
Perhaps we should both watch that film so we can comment on it further.
Oh, yes, okay. Then we'll do a podcast on it.
No.
Okay, but yeah, she was invited to an all-expenses-paid trip to Chicago to see the World Fair. And she was so impressed with Holmes and Chicago, she accepted an invitation to stay for the summer. On July the 4th, after a day at the fair, Anna wrote home with some exciting news. Holmes was going to take her and Minnie on an all-expenses-paid trip across the US, and that he will make sure every need was attended to. Her family were instructed not to worry about her, and any reply should be sent to Chicago, where it would be forwarded to where she was. The next day, before they set off on this adventure, Holmes requested Anna come see the hotel while Minnie was to stay home and pack. Holmes showed Anna the hotel, and then showed the office before asking Anna if she would collect something for him from the room next door, which was the safe. Needless to say, Anna was never heard of again. And from what I read, he just let her suffocate in this one. He didn't turn the gas on, which is goddamn horrific.
Yeah, that really is bad, because this is the thing, that the realisation that what's going to happen is going to sink in. She's going to think, oh, the door's just shut. Could you just open the door, please?
Because what he did is he snuck up and he just gently closed the door.
Yeah.
So she's probably just, if she's even noticed, she's probably just gone, oh, the door's just shut. Yeah. He'll open it in a minute.
Yeah.
And then slowly you'd panic. And yeah, that's horrible. Dealing with Minnie next, well, I'm not going to go into detail, but we'll just say that 2 more trunks were sent the way of Chapel.
When you listen to everything like this, it's horrific. I mean, obviously people didn't know what was happening, because it was literally a man who was, in the eyes of everyone, completely innocent of anything at the time, a business owner sending boxes to another business, and it wasn't that bad. But when you're listening to it, it's nightmarish.
Yeah. So soon after that, Peitzel and Peitzel's family received some free clothes and shoes. So I wonder where he got them from. Yeah.
Did they have name tags in?
No. Property of Minnie R. Williams.
Yeah.
Oh, who's that? Oh, I killed her. Oh, whoops! Oh, you caught me.
Yeah, I found them. On the body.
They just turned up in my safe.
Yeah.
So nearly single and a bachelor on the prowl, Holmes realised with mounting debt and people looking for these missing people, he realised his time with Chicago was up, and he made plans to leave, but not before he began to court a saleswoman named Georgina York. They eventually married, Holmes' 3rd official marriage, but this was under the name Henry Mansfield Howard. So now he's got 3 wives that don't know about each other.
I suppose the constant name changing would also allow him to have these several official marriages.
Yeah.
Because they're going to check. I don't know if they'd have a registry to check, but it's not going to. There's going to be no way of it ever flagging up.
By this point, I don't think he was speaking to his first wife, Clara, and I'm not 100% sure where his second wife is, Myrta. Oh, Myrta.
She'll forever be in our hearts.
Myrta, your heart. I'm going to find out where she was buried, and we're going to go visit.
We should.
Yeah. Anyway, this leaving Chicago was not a moment too soon for Holmes. As he was tempted to flee, he set fire to the top story of his hotel and tried to claim on the insurance, this time using another alias, and the insurance company, after a detailed investigation, decided it would pay, but only if the alias Hiram S. Campbell turned up in person to collect the payout. This was not possible, as the investigator had met Holmes numerous times during the investigation. The important thing this investigation brought together was all the creditors started speaking to each other. And they all like, ooh, this guy owes me money. He's owed me money for 3 fucking years now.
Woo, debt party!
So he was invited to what he believed was a meeting with one lawyer about one debt, but he was confronted by 12 separate lawyers and companies that he owed money to. During this meeting, he was given excuses, he was making offers, and it was seen that some of the lawyers were kind of nodding in agreement, saying, okay, yeah, he could do this. So he was eventually asked to wait in a separate room, in which he decided to flee, taking Georgina and the Peitzel family with him, but not before insuring Peitzel's life for $10,000, which is roughly $250,000 in real money.
That's an insane amount of money.
It is, isn't it, for some drunk's life? But no, I know why. He had gold in his blood.
Intrinsic value.
Yeah. Well, when they left, he goes all over the place. But to make money, what he did was he, again, in a different city, I presume Missouri, because that's where he ended up in jail, he decided to take out some pharmacy equipment on credit. Then he would sell the equipment to make money. He got caught for this, ended up in prison in Missouri, where he met a man named Marion Hedgepeth. Hedgepeth was a cowboy, really, a train robber, and that's why he was in jail. He was very famous at the time, apparently. And they would become friends in prison, and Holmes would eventually leak a plan to fake Peitzel's life for the insurance money to Hedgepeth. Holmes soon left prison and proceeded with the plan to fake Peitzel's death for the life insurance money. Did this, him and Peitzel, on a business trip away from the Peitzel family, and They did it by blowing him up in a room, an apparent suicide.
You mean like a balloon?
No,
Inflating.
I mean like boom.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. To pay out, the body must have had to been identified, and Peitzel's wife Carrie was too ill to travel, so their 15-year-old daughter had to travel to identify her father's body. So they did get the payout, but upon hearing this, Marion Hedgepeth, remembering the scam that he was told by Holmes in prison, decided to kind of grass on him, to tell him. I don't know who he told. He told the police for some sort of deal, the life insurance company. But anyway, the life insurance company then hired the Pinkerton National Detective Agency to hunt down Holmes.
They sound fantastic.
They sound really useless. However, they found him, so maybe not.
That shows how much you know.
Yeah. Pinkerton. Is Pinkerton a place? Who knows? He was found a month later in Boston, and what follows now is a little bit more complex, but again proves exactly how Holmes' mind worked. And he was always thinking a few steps ahead. So he was arrested then for fraud of potentially faking Peitzel's death, but it's become very apparent that he actually murdered him in a fire and tried to make it look like a suicide. And so what comes next is the police, while Holmes was in custody, the police trying to work out what actually happened in that month before they caught him in Boston. It's important to note that Holmes was looking after 3 of the Peitzel children because Carrie was ill. He had in his care Alice, 15, Nellie, 13, and Howard, 8. These children were missing while Holmes was in custody. So there was a detective designated to find out where these children were, and this man's name was Frank Geyer. And he was joined by a district attorney, George S. Graham, and they would both now embark on a cat and mouse chase around the country. The only clues they had to go on, because Holmes was denying everything, were letters that Alice, the 15-year-old, was giving to Holmes, who he said he would post to the mother. And they found these letters in a box in Holmes' possession.
This really just shows how hard the police were working, really, because they had Holmes in custody. They had him held in the cells. He was refusing to say anything, and they were trying to piece together, trying to find these children, essentially, because they were nowhere to be seen. They believed that he'd offed Peitzel. They had a sick woman, a sick widow, who had done the best thing she could do with the kids, which sent it to the only person who'd probably ever been nice to her, to be honest.
They're her husband's best friends, by all accounts.
Exactly. And then the police have basically got a man who sat there saying nothing, and they're trying to track down where these children are, basically. It's a terrible state of affairs.
It is, and the only thing they had to go in with these letters written by a 15-year-old.
Yeah, and this is after the fact, so they literally found a box of letters, and they're trying to basically find the kids from these letters.
Yeah, and it was cat and mouse. So Geyer's search started in June of 1895, and going through the letters, there was no indication of the children being with Holmes, but he was able to work out a rough route through the country of where they had been. So I'm going to assume that Holmes knew he was being chased, or he was just moving about to try and hide in case the insurance company came after him.
He was probably aware that he would have to keep moving.
Yeah.
I think it was more of probably an instinct more than a knowledge.
Yeah. And Geyer's search started in Cincinnati. Going from hotel to hotel, using pictures and descriptions, asking if anyone had seen them in the months since the letters were written. Eventually they found a hotel under the name Alex E. Cook, who was travelling with 3 children, and at that point it dawned on Geyer that Holmes had a reputation for using aliases. Never making things simple, Holmes moved hotel in the same city for a second night, using the same alias. Geyer knew this, as one of the letters suggested that they stayed in Cincinnati for a second night. Geyer knew now that this was not going to be straightforward, and the second hotel was able to confirm pictures that Alex E. Cook was in fact H. Holmes, who checked out the next morning. The next letter then suggested by that night they had headed to Indianapolis, but on a hunch Geyer looked into properties rented for the following nights and found a house was rented under a different name, but eyewitness accounts point to Holmes. Further investigation suggested Holmes didn't stay in the house, so the search continued.
So I suppose he's also told the child that was writing the letters, he said, "Oh, tomorrow night we're going to go to such and such a place."
Not so sure, and you'll find out why shortly.
Exactly, it's fascinating.
It's all over the place.
Yeah.
You'll see how his mind works shortly, and what he had under his control. The next letter directly stated what hotel they stayed in that night, so that's where the detective took his search. Under a new alias, this time taking Carrie Peitzel's maiden name, Canning, it was clear to the detective that Holmes had stayed there. The register told him it was for one night, but the letter suggested 1 week in the city. Gare conducted a similar search of that of Cincinnati hotel to hotel, and found that Holmes' wife was travelling too, but it would appear to be by herself, so she could have been in one of the rented houses that we were just talking about.
Yeah.
Finally, the search led them to a closed down hotel where the three Canning children were on the books, on the register. He hunted down the former owner and showed him the picture, and the children were instantly recognised, telling of how they were often seen crying by staff. He recalled Holmes telling that he wanted rid of the responsibility of looking after all 3 children. After this, Geyer went to Detroit, as that's where the letters led him. This time, knowing Holmes' pattern, things should be simpler. Nope. He found out that Carrie and her other 2 children were staying in Detroit at the same time. This meaning Holmes was now moving 3 different parties around the country, city to city, probably unknowing of each other. Carrie and the children had not seen each other for over a month, and they were staying 3 blocks apart and didn't even know it.
That's insane. That just shows the audacity of the man.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
The final letter, warning this is the worst, it was from Alice. And remember, this girl was 15. She was complaining of not having a jacket, being freezing, and that Howard, aged 8, was no longer with them. Writing this, crying probably, not knowing her mother was only 10 minutes away. Geyer then ended up in Toronto. After days of searching hotels, a tip came in from a Scotsman that Holmes had rented a house in Toronto, and Geyer found out from the Scotsman that Holmes had appeared and moved in with a mattress, old bed, and a large trunk. That evening, Holmes had come over to borrow a shovel to bury potatoes, and the next morning he returned the shovel and removed the trunk from the house. Once they were certain of it was Holmes, they went back to the house and dug in the basement, thus uncovering remains of 2 human bodies belonging to Nellie and Alice. Nellie had her feet cut off because I believe she had clubbed feet, and Holmes cut them off to try and help with not identifying the body.
To avoid detection, yeah.
Avoid detection, yeah.
Oh my god.
There were no signs of a violent death, and Holmes later admitting that he'd suffocated them with gas in the large trunk.
Though there must have been a struggle to get them in. You're not going to get them to get in.
Yeah.
It's horrific. It's by no means a mercy killing or any sign of kindness.
He just wanted them out of the way.
Yeah. It was
they were probably
execution.
Holding them back.
Yeah.
And he was just like, I need rid of these people. Yeah. At this point, Carrie was summoned to identify the 2 girls, Carrie being the mother, and she later remarked in court, when asked if she had seen them since Holmes took them away. She said, "Yes, I saw them in Toronto, in the morgue, side by side." The other child, Howard, was still missing, and finding Alice and Nellie had now prompted police in Chicago to search the remains of the Holmes Hotel, because he'd burnt it down, presumably as well trying to get rid of any evidence.
Yeah.
It was now becoming apparent what Holmes had been doing, the realization that during the World's Fair, Holmes could have killed hundreds of people, especially with his guile and planning. The police found rooms with no windows, rooms with airtight doors, and the gas jets stemming from Holmes' office leading to portions of the rooms. When they ventured the basement, vats of acids containing skulls were found, ribs were found, dissection tables stained in blood, and lots of quicklime. The majority of these parts belonged to women. They found gifts that Holmes had given to Minnie in a pile of ash. In another room, there were more vats filled with more remains. Skeletal remain was found of a child, believing it to be Howard, but after a medical examiner checked it, it was likely that this was a girl. So this was probably going to be Pearl, who he'd killed previously.
Jesus, I mean, it's when you wonder, when you think, oh, how could he have done how could he have offed the children in the trunk? And you think, well, it's just force of habit. It's what he's always done. He's always just offed people. He's basically ended them and then cut them up for his own entertainment. The dissections will have been a folly of his, and then cleaning the bodies to sell on. It's just
some of it was money, some of it he just seemed to enjoy.
He just viewed death as another aspect of what he did.
What I find interesting, none of this seems to be very sexual. He wasn't like sexually attracted to the children, you know. No. He didn't do a sexual gratification.
He also didn't have a typical victim. Whilst he did have, whilst his victims were a lot of the time were young women, it's probably because that was who he liked to have around and it was who he had access to. He had no issues getting rid of the children. He had no issues getting rid of Pitezel when he needed to.
Yeah, he killed anyone.
Yeah, I think it was more the act of ending life that did it for him rather than any other circumstances.
You know who didn't die?
Who?
Myrta. Yes, Myrta.
Oh, my sweet Myrta.
With all this going on, Geyer was still searching for Howard. He went back to Indianapolis and followed more tip-offs. He got like 900 tip-offs, which were no use until finally led to a house where a man said to have helped Holmes set up a wood-burning stove in which they found ashes containing human teeth, and also a toy which was a spinning top previously bought by Pitezel for Howard at the World Fair. Geyer had finally found Howard.
No.
After over a month of searching, the hotel were discovered and now Holmes was to be tried, but initially only in Philadelphia and only for the murder of Benjamin Pitezel. If that failed, then he would have been tried in Toronto for the murder of Alice and Nellie, but there was no doubt. Holmes was found guilty and then sentenced to death. Eventually, on May 7th, 1896, Holmes was to be hanged. Before his hanging, he asked for a prolonged death, asking the man to "take your time, old man." But shortly after that, Holmes was hanged, and it took him 15 minutes to die. And that now ends our story, but on a couple of little side notes. Holmes did leave instructions with his lawyers of how he was to be buried. He refused to allow an autopsy of his body. They were instructed to bury him in a lot of cement so he could never be exhumed. So that ruins our weekend plans, doesn't it?
It really is fascinating that someone that had such an interest in basically cadavers, anatomy, dissection, things like that, just in his final moments had a big fuck you to the rest of his peers, really. To say.
I think even his memoirs were a big fuck you, because he said he killed people who later turned up alive or later died of different causes.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it was a big fuck you. All of it was games with, running about with the children, stuff like that. He was probably sitting in the prison just loving it, watching this detective go around the place searching for the children. Another side note, which is maybe why he didn't want his body exhumed, a lot of strange things happened to the people surrounding the Holmes capture and capital punishment. This might, point to the fact that he actually was the devil. Detective Geyer became seriously ill. The warden of the prison committed suicide. A jury foreman was electrocuted in a freak accident. A priest that delivered the last rites was found dead in mysterious circumstances. The father of Emmeline was burned in a boiler explosion.
Jesus.
And a fire destroyed the district attorney office, leaving only a photograph of H Holmes.
That's amazing.
I don't think that's true.
No, there is some artistic license in that. I think a lot of the times it's what you read into it, because we're saying that all these people died these brutal deaths, but as we said earlier on at the start of episode 1, everyone was dying brutal deaths at the time. It was a brutal time to be alive.
Yep.
It wasn't the safe, refined, nice place to live that the world is now.
Yep.
It was violent, it was full of accidents, and it was dangerous.
It was a very dangerous place, especially with H Holmes around.
Yeah.
So reading this story, knowing what Chicago was like, it really leads me to believe that Chicago is not a nice place to live. Was not a nice place to live.
Yeah, now it's probably lovely. I'm sure it is, but we are talking about it at the time. Funny you should mention Chicago. I actually have a fact about Chicago.
What's this one?
This one is it's one that some of you may know, some of you may not. Chicago is known as the Windy City, as this was where wind was actually invented.
Wow!
Before this, the weather was calm and still. And this invention provided a much needed boost to the city's struggling kite industry.
Did it also, burn it down with the fire? Did it also help the fire?
Possibly. I mean, we're not going to point fingers.
Yeah.
Because
I have heard that Chicago has a booming kite industry.
Yeah, obviously now it is the windiest of cities.
It's the windiest of cities.
As a slight disclaimer, not all of the facts I've presented to you throughout the course of the podcast have all been true.
What? This is a greatly researched podcast.
Yeah.
And finally, to wrap things up, Jim, if there was one thing you could take away from this sad story, what would it be?
Well, I like to basically look into getting hold of some gold to inject into my bloodstream to try and cure my baldness. That's what I'd like to really look into.
Oh God. Mine would be to always do my hotel research on TripAdvisor.
Yeah, that is.
Ending on that utter nonsense, I would like to thank you on behalf of myself and Jim.
Yep.
This has been our badly researched podcast on H Holmes. If you've liked what you heard, please listen to our later podcasts when we start releasing them. You can follow us on Twitter at @mess_podcast. Instagram is called A Bloody Mess Podcast. So until next time, see you later, motherfuckers.
It went well.
It did go well.
Yeah. I'm pleased with that.
I hate our fun.
You've been listening to another great podcast from the Fair City Podcast Network, a group dedicated to connecting and developing podcasts. Check out fcpod.net for more great podcasts and content.